Hello, students, and welcome to week 11. Week 11, we're going to be talking about atypical sexual behavior and paraphilias. So, we have a little bit going on this week. We have a podcast discussion post, which is on kind of what is healthy when we talk about atypical sexual behaviors and paraphilia. So where do we draw the lines as clinicians between, something someone chooses to engage in that's perfectly healthy and natural and enjoyable and all of that, and when it becomes a paraphilia where we would actually make a diagnosis and look into treatment to help that individual to move forward in a healthier way. So I think this is a really important discussion to have so that you can start to understand where you can draw that line so that you're not misdiagnosing individuals or giving diagnosis where they don't need to be given. We also have our paraphilia presentations due this week, and each of you are going to be engaging in each other's paraphilia presentations as part of your quiz 4. So you can kind of turn those in, have them posted up on the discussion board. As soon as other groups post theirs up on the discussion board, you can go ahead and engage in it. Make sure you take that screenshot of the last slide and save it for your quiz for next week. So you could probably get started engaging in other people's presentations this week if they end up posting them sooner rather than later. So it just kind of depends. So for this week, we are going to have 3 chapters of reading. We're going to have 1 chapter from the Crooks and Bauer textbook. So if you're one of my UF students, you're going to be reading it directly from your main textbook. And if you're one of my FIU students, I have scanned in this chapter, and it's going to be attached below. So you will have access to this chapter as well. This topic was not necessarily covered in the Murray book, so that's why I added that supplemental chapter. So the chapter talks about kind of a definition of what they would consider atypical sexual behavior to be. And so it goes into some definitions of that, and paraphilia. Starts off with the critical question: do you think that the disproportionate rate of atypical sexual behavior reported among men is more attributed to biology, cultural and social conditioning, or differences in reporting? So why do you think that it leans heavier for those who identify as male versus those who identify as female? It does talk about the specific 8 most common paraphilias, which are the ones that you guys are going to be doing your reports about. This chapter can definitely be a resource that you use in that presentation, but obviously I'd like you to seek out other resources as well. And so they're laid out in here and discussed in not a ton of detail, about 2 paragraphs each, 3 paragraphs. So they explain them kind of from a very broad overview and not in a ton of detail. So that is the majority of the chapter. It gets into some other paraphilic interest, sort of not the top 8, but some additional ones that can be common. There are critical thinking questions kind of throughout the chapter in regards to those different paraphilias. So for example, you want to kind of stop and look at them. One is, people are typically much less concerned about female exhibitionism than they are about male exhibitionism. For example, if a woman is observed a man undressing in front of a window, the man might be accused of being an exhibitionist. However, if the roles were reversed and the woman was undressing, the man would likely be labeled a voyeur. What do you think about this gender-based inconsistency in labeling behaviors? Very interesting, kind of getting into the gender expectations. Another one: are exotic dancers who perform partially or totally nude engaging in exhibitionism? Why or why not? What about those people who observe these performances? Are they voyeurs? What, if anything, differentiates the diagnosed exhibitionists and voyeurs from exotic dancers and people in the audience? Which again kind of speaks to the discussion question that we have for this week. Another question: is it ethical or ethically acceptable to visit websites that offer video feeds from hidden cameras or unauthorized videos of people's private lives? Why or why not? And then the final one in this area is: which of the atypical sexual behaviors discussed in this chapter do you find most acceptable? Which do you find the most unacceptable and why, which I think is a really good question to think about anyway, because it gets into our underlying biases and kind of identifying why you feel that way and how that might impact your work with clients. It's a really good one. And then finally, just a little bit of a discussion on what factors contribute to the development of paraphilias. With this textbook, as always, there's a little summary at the end to kind of help you out. So that's basically it for that book. Like I said, I'm not going to get into too much detail because you each are going to have your own presentations to work on this week. In the Bueller textbook, sorry, for my FIU students, you have it, read it from the book. For my UF students, you're going to have chapter 18 and 19 posted below this video for you guys to read. And so for this, you're going to be reading those two chapters, 18 and 19. This one again gets into those top paraphilias and explains diagnosing them, alternative sex practices and therapy, what that sort of means, and you know, and it does give some information that can be used for your discussion post about sort of what kind of makes that line between diagnosed as a paraphilia versus just alternative sex practices. It talks about, you know, numbers of people and stuff. It has a step into my office, which is a small case study focused in this area, a really great one to look at and think about. Has another one about a couple and what happens when one person in the couple recognizes the other person in the couple is engaging in alternative sexual practices. Talks a little bit about assessment and treatment. So, you know, if we are to recognize that there's an issue within a client or a concern, what do we do? How do we address it? I mean, of course, it doesn't go into a ton of detail because this is a specialty area to work in sex therapy, but kind of gives you some ideas. As always with this textbook, the chapter ends with takeaway points, which is really good, and some activities that you can engage in to kind of help you to fully understand the topic a little bit further. The final page has resources and references, and then we move into chapter 19. Chapter 19 continues the conversation with out of control sexual behavior. So at what point does it become out of control? Goes into a little bit of a historical perspective, you know, looking at some books that were written and some characters like, you know, the famous Don Juan and the impact of that culturally, different reasons that people have given for healthy sexuality, assessment of out of control sexual behaviors. It has a step into my office, which is again a good thing to go through those case examples so that you kind of get to feeling like, okay, what would I do if this were my client? How would I react and how would I respond? Dealing with partnerships and how you work with couples and people that are in relationship with one another when one or more has an out of control sexual behavior. Gets more into the treatment of it. And then as always with these chapters, it ends in takeaway points, a couple activities to engage in to help you process this topic, resources and references. It does have an additional resource at the very end called dealing with the out of control sexual behavior. So again, these things are things that are great to directly use with clients to talk about with them. You can even copy them or scan them in for clients, so they can be really helpful. And so not a ton of reading. I know that it is 3 chapters, but the 2 Buellers are relatively short, and again, these all can be really useful in your paraphilia projects and in your discussions this week. So you won't have a ton of extra reading or anything like that. So hopefully you gain a lot from those texts. We don't have a Zoom meeting this week, so I'm going to have some links below that have some additional materials that you can take a look at on this topic. Again, maybe some stuff that you can use for your presentations, but it would be awesome if you find some stuff that I don't post so that we can get those additional resources, which is awesome. Otherwise, have a great week. I look forward to seeing your presentations. Hopefully you're looking forward to viewing each other's as well. And you will see one final video from me next week in week 12. Thank you all for listening. Bye.